Hello, and a very good morning to all of you who are joining us from India, and a very good evening to all of you who are joining us from the US. And thank you for joining this professional development session for the educators. Welcome to all the participants and the panelists. It's great to have all of you here. This session is a part of a series of professional development events that we do for our educators and counselors friends from across India. And this session is specifically about how can you guide students for highly selective colleges and programs interviews. So how to train your students for interviews, right? And as there have been a lot of test cancellations or other challenges that students have faced. In today's session, you'll learn about have interviews become more important in the college admission process. And eventually we'll also listen to these experts as they share some tips with you about how to help your students with the interview prep, right? So joining us for this session, we have Josh Pershaw, who is the Associate Dean of Admissions and Director of Global Recruiting at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon. A very warm welcome to you, Josh. Thank you for joining. We have Catherine Mehta and Kavita Pedi, who are the founders at ExtraView. Also joining us, both of them are experts in helping students and training them for their interview prep. And finally, we have our old friend Dhruva Bhatt joining us from Lumiere Education. Lumiere has been a partner with the Next Genius Foundation for the past 1 year, and Dhruva and his partner run a fantastic research program for high school students here in India. So with that, I think we are ready to start now. Thank you everyone for joining. This session is being recorded, and this means that the recording will be shared with all of you who could not join the session and would be watching this later. And we will take all the Q&A towards the end of the session. So if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the panel, and we would definitely try and address as many of them as possible by the end of that session. And with that, once again, welcome everyone, and we are now ready to start. So my first question is to you, Josh. If you could tell us that it's mostly about, like, right now, in the absence of testing, a lot of SATs and ACTs are being canceled. And in the last 1 year, we have seen that lots of tests or other in-person events also canceled, right? A lot of students were not able to participate in many profile building opportunities. So with all of this, have interviews become more important for you in the college admission process?
Yeah, thank you so much, Devesh, and thank you so much to my fellow panelists and for everyone for joining us this evening or morning, depending upon where in the world you are. But first, I want to share a little bit more about my background to give you some context of the perspective that I'm coming from. I've been working in selective college admission for the past 15 years. First at a small liberal arts college, Knox College in Illinois, and more recently now I'm at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon. But both colleges where I've worked are quite small, and we're able to really get to know a student well through the application process. So the interview at both of these institutions where I've worked has always been important. An optional part of the application, certainly, recognizing that not everyone has the opportunity. Although now with things like Zoom and other virtual experiences, it's maybe much more possible to bring everybody into a conversation about themselves. But the question's framed in the sense of the absence of test scores now from the process has elevated perhaps the importance of an interview. And again, both institutions where I've worked were leaders in the test optional movement. Lewis and Clark, in fact, eliminated testing as part of the application in 1991. So 30 years ago, we've ceased to use the SAT or the ACT as a core part of the application, just a few years behind Bates, which was really the leader. And we've seen a lot of much more highly selective universities following us, probably most notably the University of Chicago recently, maybe one of the most selective universities that abandoned testing prior to the outbreak of the COVID pandemic. But and then the University of California, which certainly was pushed a bit through lawsuits and such, but they found as well that the SAT may not be a critical part. So just to frame the idea that I personally have never seen the ACT and the SAT as being central to admission in places where I've worked, and I think that is the continued trend. I'd much more like to think about the complexities of the human being that we're engaging with and potentially enrolling into our communities, people who have passions and curiosities and deep thoughts, and to learn about those. So that's really the place that I think the interview presents the greatest opportunity for us as admission officers, or student fellows, occasionally alumni. That's becoming much less common, but whoever's conducting the interview, and ultimately that information getting back to the admission committee, we are getting a much greater sense of the whole person, and not just the test scores. The other thing I'll say that I think motivated the test optional movement previously, but is also quite relevant here in privileging the admission interview, is recognizing that students should be focused on their high schools and the curriculum in their classrooms, and not seeking out outside opportunities to master some skill, test taking, in order to get into the principal college. But the interview really isn't something, I mean, I know we're talking about interview preparation, but it's not something that you can fully memorize in advance. The skills that make you a good interview are certainly things that can be practiced, being authentic and being able to express yourself clearly, things, getting beyond your nerves, etc., when having a one-on-one conversation. But you can't change who you are unless you're, I suppose, an incredibly good actor. But that's another skill entirely. So the interview does really, I think, give us a chance to get to know, can this young person think well on their feet? Are they creative? What is their personality? What's truly motivating their interest? What are they going to get out of the experience on our campus? Are they going to be the type of student who excels academically but doesn't do a lot, or are they going to be the person who really takes advantage of all the opportunities that our communities offer? Remembering that, especially at residential colleges, which most top universities in the US are for their undergraduate colleges, we're looking for a diverse cross-section of students to be able to enrich the experience and to be able to share it with each other. So yes, I think that the interview is an incredibly important opportunity for us and for the student, because it also gives them a chance to get to know the college and ask their difficult questions. I always am reminding students it's a two-way process. We both get to decide at some point along the way. So anyway, I think that answers your question perhaps a little bit, but gives some sense of my thoughts on the importance and relevance of the interview, and that's only been elevated as we're losing these other data points, like test scores. I guess there's one more thing that I'll throw out there that I think is relevant too, that we don't like to talk a lot about, I think, as admission officers, but as a professional development opportunity, I think it's fair to be pretty honest, that a lot of highly selective colleges are looking to admit students that are going to enroll. So we talk about demonstrated interest, and the interview is an investment of time on both the part of the university and the student in a pretty serious way. And I think there are few things that, perhaps aside from literally visiting the college, that can demonstrate some genuine interest in the place, especially if you come to the interview quite informed. So that plays into it, I think, somewhat too.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing those insights, Josh. And you were talking about a lot of different kinds of interviews, right? Like alumni interview or interview with the admission officer or interview with a student on campus, right? So that brings me to my next question then, that is, what are the different kinds and formats of college interviews? And but again, before moving to that, I think let me also first hear it from Dhruv. Dhruv, you also run a selective research program, right? And for you also, I believe the interview process is a critical component. So what are the aspects that you look for in the interview process?
Yeah, of course. So the research program I run is quite an intensive 12-week one-on-one program. And so what that means is that we need to identify the students who are ready for that and excited about that opportunity. And that's basically what we're looking for through the interview process. Students apply to a written application, and then when we interview them, it's a reasonably short, sort of 15 or so minute one-on-one interview where we're looking for 4 things largely. The first thing we're looking for is, do they have intellectual curiosity? In that, have they thought about their experiences so far, the things that they have read and watched and done, and genuinely, consciously thought about it in a way that then brings them to this point where they say, this is why I want to do research on X topic. So, a really important thing for us is that I think this is a little bit different to universities, because the nature of a liberal arts university is that you can try out different things before picking one. In a research program, unless you have a reasonable sense of what you want to work on from day one, you're going to find it quite hard to get it off the ground. And so we don't need students to come in knowing, I want to do research on the genetic mutation that causes rats to develop X disease. That's too specific. And, high school students are not at the level where they can do that. But we do need them to say, okay, I've thought about all of the classes I have taken, the programs I've done, the extracurricular activities I've done. And I know that genetics broadly is what I'm interested in for X, Y, Z reasons. That is super important for us, because otherwise we find that students come into the program with too wide of an interest. They end up being a little bit disappointed. So in order to achieve that, they need to both do some of the work of reading and watching videos and trying out things, as well as thinking. The second thing we're looking for sure is academic ability. It's no mean feat to write a 15 to 20 page paper, to read academic papers, to engage in conversations with graduate students in your subject. And so we're not necessarily looking for straight A's. We understand that students can demonstrate academic ability in different ways, but they do need to show that they are smart and that they are able to take on this kind of academic burden right from day one. And the third thing in terms of just readiness for the course that we're looking at is, are they willing to put in the time, and are they excited to put in the time, and are they able to put in the time? Research is something that doesn't come easily. We expect students to put in 5 to 10 hours of work a week. And so we expect students to be very explicit about saying, okay, here are my other extracurricular commitments, here's how much time school takes, and as a result, here's how I envision Lumiere fitting into that. And I think that's the third thing, which is just demonstrating that we've thought through how this is going to be a part of my life for the next 3 months, and that I've given it the time it deserves for me to be able to do it well. Those 3 are sort of the core components of being able to do research well. And remember, and I think this is something, Joshua, you might agree with as well, that we're evaluating all of these in the context that the student comes from. So of course, if the student comes from a low resource context, or the student comes from a situation where they haven't had as many opportunities, we're not going to hold it against them that they haven't done an expensive summer school. But if they're able to demonstrate that they've read things online, that they've looked up books at the local library, that they've helped out in their community in a related area, that's plenty to demonstrate the kind of initiative and engagement that matters. Final thing that we look for is, of course, they're joining an academic community. They're going to be engaging with other students. We have this Discord server where they play games and talk to each other. And we want them to be a contributing and engaged member of that community as well. So we do think through, is this someone who is someone that others will enjoy spending time with and getting to know, and will they be a productive member of that community? That doesn't mean they have to be extroverts, but it does mean that they have to display this sort of common ideals of kindness and respect and interest in others that I think we all look for in members of our community. So those are the 4 things we look for, and I'll pause there and pass it back to you, Devesh.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing all of those insights with us, Toa. To all of us who joined a little late, we are here with our 4 panelists, and they are sharing with us about the importance of interviews, and eventually in the next few minutes, you'll listen to them about some tips that you can give to your students to prepare well for the interviews. So my next question is to you, Catherine and Kavita, as experts in interview prep and as experts and someone who have been guiding students for interviews. Can you first tell us a little bit about what are the different formats of interviews that you see students and colleges and programs engaging in? And if you could also tell us briefly or describe those formats for us, please.
Sure. I'd be happy to. So a few of these Joshua began to speak about as well. So one of them is the admissions officer interview, where a student would be interviewing with an admissions officer like Joshua from the university. This interview can take place in different ways. It could be in person, on campus. If, sort of pre-COVID, when admissions officers were visiting, it might take place in the student cities. And these days, many of the interviews now take place online. So there are lots of ways that this interview can take place. Students can either request the interview or they may be invited for it, depending on each university or college's individual policy. Typically, the interviews can be both informational, meaning that it's more sort of an exchange of information between the student and the admissions officer, where the student is learning more about the university, or it could be evaluative, meaning that it plays a direct role in the way that a student is being considered for the university. And I would say that these interviews are on the more formal side. Joshua, feel free to step in if you feel otherwise, but on the more formal side, a student should be really well prepared for this one, because the admissions officer plays a direct role in deciding whether or not the student will be admitted to the university. So students need to make sure that they're well prepared for this. They know enough about the university to be able to articulate why they're interested, why they think it's a good fit, some of the things that they're excited about. The other thing is that admissions officers, depending on where the student is in the application cycle, may have access to their admissions file if the student has already applied. So the admissions officer will come into the interview with that context and may ask questions about something that the student has already written in their admissions file. Another kind of interview that takes place with a person could be either a student interview or an alumni interview. So in both cases, this would be someone who's sort of acting as a representative for the college. They've been trained, usually students who are there, they may be a part of the one of the student fellows at the admissions office. So they would have been trained to understand what the admissions office is kind of trying to glean from these interviews with students. Again, they can take place in person on campus, maybe during locally, especially if there are local alumni, or it could be online. And these ones tend to be a little less formal, especially if it's with a current student, though they could still be evaluative if that student is a part of the admissions office. In this, the interviewer usually won't have as much information about the student beforehand, especially if it's an alumni. They may know where they're from, what school they attend, maybe the major that they're interested in, but this will be more of an opportunity for a student to speak about themselves and share information that is in their application or in their resume, because the interviewer won't necessarily have that. Then there are a few other sort of digital formats for interviews. So one of them is a video essay or a video portfolio. There are a few universities that give students the option to share these as a part, as a supplement to their application. Up until now, I'm just trying to think, I believe that all of them are optional, but recommended if it is a strong opportunity for a student to share more about themselves. So these video interviews may have a prompt. They may be completely open-ended, but a student either way should prepare for it beforehand, before they sit down to record their interview. They should know what they're going to say about themselves and how it adds something else to their application that isn't, it doesn't just repeat information that's already there in other parts of the application. It serves to kind of round out and bring more of their voice and personality to the application that may not already be there. Then the final type of interview is a digital video interview that's done with an external service provider. So it's not done directly with a student, alumni, or admissions officer. And there are two formats for this. It can either be a live interview that's taking place with someone from that partner's team. So these are service providers who have partnered with universities. So there will be a live Zoom interview, but instead of being university specific, it will be more about finding and learning about the student through the questions that are asked, through the conversation that emerges in the interview. The other kind would be a computer-based video format, where instead of interacting with a person through their interview, there would be questions that pop up on the screen. Students usually have 20 to 40 seconds to prepare. They state their answer, and then that video is captured and it's sent directly to the admissions office. And so we see this one sometimes for business programs in Canada. There are a few business programs that require it. There are a few other competitive business programs in the US at the undergraduate level that want to see this pre-recorded video interview. And for the other one that takes place live between an interviewer and the student, those typically can be shared with many universities. And those, again, are a great opportunity for students to be able to really share more about themselves, about what they're interested in, their passions through this conversation, and then add that as a supplement to their application. Again, with these, students should be prepared. They should have practiced in order to put their best foot forward in any of these different interview formats.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing all of that information, Catherine. That's amazing to know. There are so many different formats, and everyone tests, or every format looks at a different aspect of a student's holistic personality, right? So as someone who runs a scholarship program at Next Genius, we also host a couple of interviews, different kinds of interviews. We have an interview where a Next Genius scholar at the campus of a college interviews a Next Genius candidate. And I think that's a very important aspect of our program, because that helps us understand fit, whether a candidate or a scholarship winner or an applicant is a good fit into that particular college. And the second interview is the one where the admission officers, just like Josh and other officers from all the different colleges, interview the candidates in a group interview format. So all these interviews actually add tremendous value to the student's application, because eventually it's not just one aspect that we are looking at while offering these scholarships, but it's a combination of a lot of things that eventually helps take that scholarship decision. So yeah, okay. So now let's move on to the next question, and I would now request all of you to share some tips that would help the students to prepare for these interviews. So I'm starting off with you, Catherine. Catherine, what are some tips, Catherine and Kavita, what are some tips that you would like to share with the students as they apply to highly selective colleges and programs?
Sure. So our tip, I'll speak on behalf of both of us. Our tip would be to own your narrative, because the objective of an interview is for a university or a program to learn more about you. So what are your goals? What are you passionate about? Why do you do what you do? To convey all of this information in a really clear and compelling way, you need to have a firm grip on your personal narrative. So how do you sort of convey the events and the moments that have been really significant in shaping who you are and what you aspire to do? So the best way to prepare for this and to kind of think through this and frame it is to, before going into an interview, ask yourself 3 questions. Who am I today, and what do I believe in? What important events, moments, or turning points in my life have shaped me into that person? And then how has this influenced my future goals and what I aspire to do? Because I think if someone can identify and articulate all of those, especially in that order, sort of the before, middle, and then the after, what do I want to do? Then you've found your personal narrative. And if you can find a way to weave this into the interview, then that gives a really clear and compelling picture of who you are, what you're passionate about, and what you aspire to do in the future.
Superb. That was fantastic. Who am I? What am I passionate about? And what do I aspire to be? Wonderful. I think that's really a very crisp way of looking at an interview. Whenever a student is sort of thinking of an interview, why not just start off by writing answers to that question? I think that would not just help them prepare for the interview, but also help them gain insights about themselves. Okay, Dhruva, over to you now. What are some of the factors that students should work upon when they are preparing for interviews?
Yeah, I was going to talk about the importance of reading up about the institution that you're applying to, but then Joshua covered that so well in his introductory remarks. So I don't want to repeat that. But instead, I think I'll take a page from the many years that I've been coaching debating. I've been coaching the national team, and all debates are judged on 3 criteria: on content, strategy, and style. And I think all 3 of those are what matter for an interview as well. On content, we've talked about a lot of things: thinking about your narrative, thinking about the institution you're applying to, thinking about your own application, and being sure that you're very prepared for the interview in terms of the content, the questions that they ask. But the other 2, I think, are just as important. So strategy is saying, of all of these different things that exist in my application, what do I most want to get out of this interview? What is that? If I want the interviewer to go away from this interview remembering 1 or 2 things, what are those 2 things? And thinking strategically in advance about how you're going to ensure to bring those up and impress that upon the interviewer in some way or the other. Another aspect of strategy is time management. If you have a 30-minute interview where you spend 10 minutes introducing yourself, or 15 minutes talking about the vacation you just took, you're going to find it hard to cover everything you want to cover. So part of strategy is also knowing how to maneuver a conversation where you say, oh, and that of course reminds me of this thing that I did, and bring the conversation to where you want it to be, such that you're able to ensure that you cover time in the way that you want. And finally, of course, style. Style does not mean accent. It does not mean necessarily fluency, because we recognize that people come from a wide variety of backgrounds, and it's important. And I think most interviewers will accommodate that and be understanding of that. But what it does mean is, are you coming across as authentic, as personable, and are you trying to make a connection with the interviewer? And I think that can go an incredibly long way if you ensure that you begin and end your interview with some sort of personal connection that you try and build, whether that's a remark about where you are currently, about if you, at the end of the conversation, refer back to something that you had talked about during the conversation. All of these little things that you could do to build a relationship with the interviewer in the small amount of time you have can go a long way towards making that interviewer then want to advocate for you when they're going away and writing notes or talking about you to the other admissions officers. So content, strategy, style, they're all important and all things worth thinking about before you enter an interview.
Superb. So that's again an amazing way to look at and to prepare for your interview. Actually, we're just getting two different strategies simultaneously you can work upon. You can work upon either thinking about who, what's your passion, what's your aspirations, and eventually when you're done with that phase, you can start looking more specifically upon the content. How are you going to present yourself? What's going to be your strategy? And of course, time management. What all different aspects would you like to focus upon? And finally, your style. How you want to demonstrate and portray yourself as an authentic individual, right? Fantastic. So finally, coming over to you, Josh, what are some of the aspects that you would tell the students should think about when they're preparing for these interviews?
Yeah, I think a student taking both of these tips and advice would be very well prepared for an interview, to have a strong sense of their own narrative and to be approaching the interview with some sense of strategy. Both of those things, I think, would make for a highly impactful interview with me. My, I think, most important tip that I happily share with students when they ask me what they can do to prepare is to, as we mentioned before, to do some research about the college. You don't have to be an expert at that point. At the point that you're doing your interviews, certainly you may have 10 or perhaps more universities still on your list that you're exploring, but to have a sense of the university. And the reason I say that is because I think too often students forget that this whole process is really a conversation where it's not just you winning a prize. It's not about just gaining admission to a selective college. It's about finding the college that you want to be at, that meets your needs, that's going to help you achieve the goals of your future self that you've recognized in putting together this narrative about who you are. So you're interviewing us through this whole process as much as we're interviewing you. And while your strategy might not be to want to totally take over the interview and make it all about drilling us with your difficult questions, I do very much respect a student who has some genuine curiosity and question in their approach to the interview, and is prepared to be just as evaluative, not necessarily of me as an admission officer, but recognizing that I represent an institution that they think they want to become a member of, but they're not totally sold at that moment any more than we are. So I like the idea of it being a two-way conversation. And coming along with that is this idea of being authentic to yourself. Don't try to be something you're not. Too often through the whole process, not just in the interview, I think students are trying to tell me what they think I want to hear, rather than being true to their own narrative and their own self. And that can mean, we talked before about, it's not that we're looking for all extroverted people. If you're not an outgoing, big, gregarious personality, don't attempt to be that in the interview. We very intentionally train our staff and even hire staff with a very wide-ranging personality types and approaches, so that you're not always going to be in a conversation with a big personality extroverted person, but we recognize that you wouldn't be that either. So I hope that students approach it with an open mind to learn about the institution as much as we're learning about them, and to very much be authentic to who they are. So thanks.
Superb. Thanks for all those insights, Josh. So research the college very well, and yes, be yourself. I mean, be authentic, right? And I think when we talk with past next genius scholars, and when we ask them how was the interview and what do you think, how did you approach the interview, the one thing that always comes out is be authentic, be yourself. And a lot of times, I ask them, what does being yourself mean, right? And it's being yourself means just if you are you be true to your personality, just like Josh was mentioning. If you are like someone who does not speak too much, or someone who's a little introverted, don't try to change your personality or try to portray yourself as an extroverted person. Just be yourself. While doing that, of course, you research the college, research the kind of programs that you are getting into, but just be yourself, because they are going to accept you for who you are, right? And that would also mean that that would also see the fit, right? If they are looking at your fit, whether you are a good fit into their community or not. So just be yourself. All right, so that takes care of tips from all of us, interview preparation tips. We are going to be open for any Q&A, so I would request all of you to post your Q&A in the chat box. And before we get going with that, I would request if Catherine and Kavita, if you could share a little bit more about ExtraView and ExtraPrep, and how can your programs help the students with interview prep. Over to you, Catherine.
So I'm going to step in here. And for a person who's founded a company whose tagline says, speak, showcase, and succeed, I've been awfully quiet in the webinar this far. But I'm going to take this opportunity now to talk about ExtraView and talk about the fact that how our mission is to help students tell their own stories in a way that suits them best. And we've spent a large amount of this webinar talking about how students need to be authentic and how they need to be true and not shy away from the fact of them being able to state who they really are in their own words. So ExtraView was founded in the year 2020 when we found a need to create this digital platform that students could come on and record interviews that they could either use as a practice platform before recording all the interviews that they need to do to send to the universities, or to then record these interviews and have them as additions to their written applications. And as we founded this platform, the world had changed and digital interactions are now here to stay. So there is this great need for the student community to learn how to interact in this new manner that makes it engaging even while we are distanced from one another and not doing in-person interactions. So we founded this platform, and we also felt there is a need to teach students how to upskill themselves so that they are able to showcase who they really are. So we have a digital proprietary platform that students can use to record interviews, also use it as a practice platform when they apply to learning programs such as Lumiere, when they apply for internship opportunities, and when they apply to colleges and universities as part of their scholastic careers. The second part of what we do is a learning program called ExtraPrep. These are skills that empower students to succeed in the real world. We all know that there is a ton of academic curriculum available that enhances our students' academic abilities. But in today's new enhanced world, the skills need to be enhanced. I think India is changing, the world is changing, and there is this whole push about being Atmanirbhar and having a more entrepreneurial mindset. And I think for all of that, the biggest things that the student base and community needs today is to learn how to communicate and present the best version of themselves. And so ExtraPrep is a learning platform that empowers students with real world skills. So how do we partner with counselors? We have various modules that happen. So we've got the ExtraPrep interview preparation workshops. These are priced at $2,999. These include 15 areas where we train students, from things as small as being punctual to learning how to own your narrative. These are big and small things, teachings that students are taught. And then they do a practice interview that not only do they learn, but they also get to demonstrate that learning. ExtraView is also available, like we said, as a practice platform. And here students have two options. One is to come on board, and for the confident ones, do one interview, crack it. They get a recording of that along with assessment from us. And then they choose to better themselves or better whatever area they feel they need improvement on. But not all students are self-starters, and some require more practice. Sensing that need of enabling students for success, we also have a method where there are 3 mock interviews, where a student gets a chance to do one, receive feedback, do the second one, where they get better at it, and then finally go out and take the final shot at doing that interview. These are some of the things on the interview platform. We also do, like we said, we empower them for real world. So resume writing workshops is something that we do. Also for students who are wanting to do entrepreneurship programs, internship programs, or other academic learning programs, we also do elevator pitch workshops where students learn what bits of their narrative they need to put together to present themselves as an irresistible candidate to whatever they apply to. So while you'll see prices against some of the others, we do offer all of these services, and we're happy to engage in a one-on-one discussion to curate packages and sort of boutique offerings to counselors as they require for their students.
Fantastic. Kavita and Catherine, I'd also request both of you if you could put down your email ID in the chat box so that students can connect with you. And I think that Dhruva and Josh, if you could also put down your email ID in the chat so that the counselors who are here can get in touch with you and sort of ask questions. I can see a couple of questions have come in, and I'm just going to read those out. And if any of you who would like to address them could just go ahead. So the first question is from Neha. She's asking, their students have struggled with video interviews, especially where they have a hypothetical situation prompts. So how can that be addressed? So who would like to go for that one? Interview prompt where they are given a hypothetical prompt or a situation.
So if I may come in first.
Yes.
One of the tips that we teach our students is the power of 3 Ps. And that is sort of encapsulating everything that all the panelists have said so far. The 3 Ps talk about preparation, practice, and pre-research. If a candidate or a student has paid enough attention to all these 3, then they apply those learnings to the hypothetical situations that come up. The problem arises when you give a student 5 questions to learn by heart, and rote learning, unfortunately, is a very systemic part of the Indian education system. So then when they get a hypothetical situation, they are unable to apply that learning to the conversation that needs to get placed. So I think we need to retrain the students a little bit to employ all the strategies that have been discussed on this panel today. And once they do that, you see the difference in how a student then starts applying that learning to the prompts that are given.
Superb. That's fantastic. Absolutely. Okay, there are a couple more questions which have come on and come up. The first one is, how can we get someone who is academically strong but is very quiet to speak up?
I could take this. I think coaching, debating, this is all I've been doing for many years, and something that we've thought about with Lumiere as well to draw people out. A couple of things. The first is, as Josh mentioned, and just to give you a heads up, any good university or program will have trained their interviewers to recognize when this sort of situation exists and train them on how to draw the best out of a student, to make them feel comfortable, to ask them questions that are in their ballpark to begin with, to help draw out the student's strengths. And so if the program hasn't done it, then that's a real failing on their part. And I think you can assure your students that the interviewers will be doing their best to do this, and that they'll be trained to do it. The second thing that I think is really valuable in these sorts of situations is just lots and lots of practice. Even for people who are very comfortable talking, speaking in an interview and in a structured way is very different to talking in a offhand conversation or online. And so doing practice interviews, whether that's through a program like ExtraView or whether that's with teachers, with parents, with counselors, just especially for those who are a bit more introverted or quiet, I think it's valuable to get them comfortable with just loosening up the normal types of questions that get asked in these interviews, getting into the habit or the practice of speaking out in response to these questions. The third and final thing I'd say is it would help to train the student or get the student to identify the things that they feel like they really are experts at. There are things that academically they know so well. There are things within their life that they've experienced that no one else can talk about as well as they can. And getting them to think through how they can bring the conversation to those topics and demonstrate the amount of knowledge and passion and excitement they have in those specific areas in which they feel very strong in, can make up for weaknesses in other parts of the interview. So if there's a kid who, for of the 15-minute interview spent in the 5 minutes that we talk about astrophysics, just her face lights up and can talk about the intricacies of astrophysics in a way that no other student can. That can make the interview for us, because that shows that the student, even if maybe they stuttered a little bit during other parts of the interview, has something that is really lighting them up from the inside, and that can make up for a lot of things. So encourage them to bring the conversation to their strengths and demonstrate the full force of their intellect and passion in that area.
That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing all those superb strategies, Dhruva. We are almost coming towards the end of the session, but before closing, I would also request Dhruva and Josh to briefly introduce their organizations, maybe in a couple of minutes. Josh, if you could tell us very briefly about Lewis and Clark, and then Dhruva, you could tell us a little bit more about Lumiere research programs.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'd love to share a bit about Lewis and Clark College. We're a very traditional liberal arts and sciences college located in the hills of Southwest Portland, Oregon. So we are in a major city on the western coast of the United States. So when you're on our campus, you'd have no idea that you were in a big city. It's an old growth forest, beautiful campus, actually recently recognized as the most beautiful college campus in the United States. So it's quite green, quite removed from the city environment, but being in such close proximity to the city of Portland, which is one of the coolest, hippest, youngest cities in the United States. There's excellent food, excellent cultural opportunities, excellent access to internships where you don't have to take time away in a summer or semester to engage in an internship. It can be part of your day. So it really is an excellent place to study, whether it's the sciences, the social sciences, the arts, or the humanities. The other thing I think that makes Lewis and Clark quite distinctive among small liberal arts colleges is our outdoor education programs. Given the proximity to Mount Hood, which is the tallest mountain nearby, the only place in North America where there's year-round skiing, or the Oregon coast, which is just an hour away, the Columbia River Gorge. Great opportunities for hiking, for kayaking, whitewater rafting, snowshoeing, skiing, these types of things. So for students that are interested in the environment and being outdoors and serious about their academics, but also liking to have a good time doing it, Lewis and Clark can be an excellent choice for their lists. And a number of people have mentioned that practice for interviews is a good thing to do. And I know even if Lewis and Clark isn't the top institution on their list, if it's on their list somewhere, I'd be happy to talk with them for an admission interview, or one of my staff would, as you know, not necessarily thinking of it as practice, but as an opportunity to get to know a place that maybe they hadn't been already familiar with. And at the same time, beefing up their interview skills. And who knows, at the end of the conversation, they may be, I may be sold that they're an excellent match, and they may be sold that we're a place that they need to take seriously as well. So thank you so much for the opportunity, Devesh.
Superb. Thanks for sharing that wonderful information, Josh. And with that, let me also add that Lewis and Clark, you have an opportunity to win scholarships at Lewis and Clark through the Next Genius Scholarship Program. So if you or your students have not yet applied to the Next Genius Scholarship Program, they have an opportunity to win amazing scholarships to colleges like Lewis and Clark. The application deadline for the program is coming up in the next 10 days. So I'd encourage all of you to check that out. And now over to you, Dhruva. Could you tell us a little more about the research programs at Lumiere?
Yes, of course, it will be my pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for a wonderful conversation. I think I learned a lot through it, and I hope everyone watching did too. So as I mentioned at the beginning, Lumiere is a one-on-one 12-week research program that runs 4 times over the course of the year. Our winter cohort is coming up in December, so take a look at our website, and do feel free to email me or add me on LinkedIn if you have any questions. In the program, your students will be working one-on-one with a PhD mentor from a top university in the US or the UK, and working under their guidance and supervision to do an independent research project that helps them explore a topic of their interest, gain research skills, and of course, build a project that they can demonstrate when applying to universities as proof of their academic ability and initiative and hardworkingness. It's something that we've had over 600 students from 26 different countries do so far, and I really hope that some of your students will join them this winter cohort as well.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that information, Dhruva. Yes, many of Next Genius students have been a part of Lumiere, and they have shared wonderful reviews of their experience with Dhruva and Stephen and their mentors. So I would highly encourage you to get in touch with Dhruva and learn more about Lumiere. And there is also a form that Catherine has posted in the chat. If you could also take a look at it and fill that form, that would help us know more about your experience and get in touch with you. So With that, I think we are now towards the end of the session, and I would like to thank all of you, all the participants, all the attendees for joining, and all the panelists. Thank you for sharing all your insights. Thanks, Josh, Catherine, Kavita, and Dhruv. Thank you for your time on this call. This session was recorded, so if you missed out a part of it, this is going to be there on our YouTube channel. We'll make sure that you get the link to it. And of course, if you have not noted down the email IDs of all the panelists, they are still in the chat box. So please feel free to copy that, and feel free to reach out to all of them with any questions about interviews or otherwise also. So we are right on time. Thank you, everyone.